Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome really back to the program Wes Cheek. He is a sociologist, assistant professor at Massachusetts Maritime Academy. And longtime listeners might know that this show, this iteration of the Majority Report, early on featured reports out of Japan in the wake of the Fukushima disaster from Wes. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks so much, Tim. Yeah, just briefly on that. Like, my career started on this show like 14 years ago when I texted Sam and was like, Sam, I listened to your show in Japan. I'm about to drive into a tsunami. Is that cool with you? And he was kind of like, well, maybe a little bit. And then I ended up, the last 14 years working on disasters. So I guess, I was a Majority Reporter back then.
I have referenced you multiple times in my understanding of disasters.
Oh, great!
Will you just give me your what is involved in the study of disasters, and what that sort of precept is about so-called natural disasters?
That's a good question. I like that question. So the study of disasters, it seems like we forget about this every time a new disaster happens, but people have been studying disasters for almost like 70 years now, especially in the realm of sociology and geography, right? So we know and understand that disasters aren't like weather events or even climate events. They're complex sociological phenomenon, right? And they are socially constructed in the same way a lot of our society is. So we construct what we call social vulnerabilities, which are then impacted by hazards being things like, hurricanes, floods, volcanoes, whatever. But it doesn't happen in a way that's just completely natural, right? It's not like everyone's affected the same by a disaster, right? It affects people who are socially vulnerable more. And that doesn't mean it only affects socially vulnerable people, but poverty is like the number one predictor of being affected adversely by a disaster. There's a whole gender component. There's racial components. There are sexuality components, right? If you are more likely to get kicked out of your house, you're less likely to have a place to shelter. So also this idea of natural disasters is something that is used a lot by politicians and by insurance companies and a lot of other bad actors to kind of write off everything that we construct as a society and say, well, what could you do? Like, Trump's been doing this week in Texas. Well, who could have done anything about a flood? How do we know that a flood would happen? These are just things that happen. So that's been kind of, there's been a very good, especially if you're on the left, a lot of great leftist academic writing, including, Mike Davis, David Harvey, even going back to like Kropotkin writing on like mutual aid, right? Lining up for us, like why this stuff is not just naturally, it's a sociological phenomenon. Does that get you to where we were going?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and there's certainly, there are elements of, the expansion of that camp in Kerr County, or right, the potential for funding that was given from the Biden administration at Kerr County and the way they deployed it. And then just even the, you had some official there saying, well, the taxpayers didn't want to pay for a warning system. This is all socially constructed that leads to a disaster.
Absolutely.
But I want to talk to you first about FEMA.
Yeah.
There's been a lot said. Let's just first let's play this this clip. This is number 4. Kristi Noem on Meet the Press, reporting to news about thousands of unanswered calls.
Right.
I do want to talk big picture in just a moment, but the New York Times is reporting that thousands of calls from flood victims to FEMA call centers went unanswered in the middle of this ongoing disaster because you didn't renew contracts to keep call center staff in place until nearly 1 week after the floods. Why did it take so long to extend those contracts?
It's just false. Those contracts were in place.
Nobody, it didn't take 5 days?
No employees were off of work. Every one of them was answering calls. So false reporting, fake news, and it's discouraging. It's discouraging that during this time when we have such a loss of life and so many people's lives have turned upside down, that people are playing politics with this because the response time was immediate. And if you talk to anyone in Texas that was there, that was a part of this operation, they would say the federal government and President Trump immediately responded.
Just to be very clear, on July 7th, 15.9% of calls were answered. I mean, does that concern you that only 15% of calls were answered? These are people in a desperate state. FEMA, often the first call that they make, only 15% were answered on July 7th, several days after the floods.
These contracts were in place and those people were in those call centers and they were picking up the phone and answering these calls from these individuals. So that report needs to be validified. I'm not certain it's accurate, and I'm not sure where it came from. And the individuals who are giving you information out of FEMA, I'd love to have them put their names behind it, because the anonymous attacks politicize the situation.
Okay. I bet she'd want to know who's leaking that information. Exactly. 15% of all calls coming into FEMA. That is, I mean,
it's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. I don't know how you get worse than that. So give me your sense. I mean, you obviously have a lot of relationships in and around FEMA. Give me your sense of like what's going on there.
Yeah. And I should say, like, you know, I worked internationally most of my career. So like I'm relearning the FEMA system as I've moved back to the US as well. But like what's going on at FEMA right now should be a gigantic scandal. And it's one of these things under Trump that's so frustrating, I think, for many people, where it's all this stuff that would normally be a huge scandal. It's just kind of like, well, I don't know. I guess they just don't do this anymore, right? So let me run it down really quickly. We have someone who is the administrator of FEMA right now who has not gone through congressional approval. He's just kind of been put up there, and I think he's temporary. And my assumption is he's temporary until they decide to phase out FEMA or whatever, right? Who's David Richardson. Zero experience in emergency management, none. He was in the Marine Corps. He like led their artillery school for a while, and then he was in DHS in their like weapons of mass destruction division, right? Zero experience in emergency management. And I'm just going to say at the outset, we're at the 20th anniversary of Katrina, right? I was just in New Orleans for 4 weeks before coming up to Asheville as I'm making my disaster rounds. You know, and one of the main things we took away from Katrina was we need people who know how to do this stuff. You can't put Mike Brown in charge of FEMA, right? This is what you get. So, but we're back to where we started, if not worse. We have David Richardson, knows nothing about emergency management, right? Okay, because all of this is going on at FEMA, people have been leaving FEMA, career professionals who do know what they're doing. So currently, and I can't speak personally to why these people left FEMA or not, but make of it what you will. Regions 6 and 4, which is the U.S. Gulf Coast, Texas, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, regions 6 and 4 currently do not have regional administrators, right? You can go on the FEMA website. Nobody's home. Nobody's running the office, right? I think last time I looked, they don't have assistant administrators either. At least one of them don't. So there is a FEMA sort of director, no clue what he's doing, shows up in Texas a week late wearing like a boater hat, tight blue jeans, and like a medallion and a button-down shirt. Very strange. You also have, you know, no one's at these regions, right? There's some career professionals there, but no one's leading them. So you don't have the leadership there. And you have regions like Region 1, which is New England, which you have Doucette, who's a conspiracy theorist who just tweets conspiracy junk all day instead of leading this. So what you're seeing, I think, at FEMA is what you're seeing across the federal government, which is just a complete like ridiculing of the idea of public service, ridiculing the idea of expertise, forcing people kind of out of it by making it a miserable job, putting in incompetent people, and then somehow just saying, oh, well, you know, I guess it'll work out. One other thing about David Richardson quickly. I don't know if you guys covered it or not, but did anyone cover like his bonkers addresses he gave to FEMA that were leaked?
Is this the one about hurricane season?
Well, there's that one where he said he didn't know there was hurricane season, and the answer was, well, he's joking. Which either way, don't be the head of FEMA, right? Oh, you're joking about hurricane season. Well, on the Gulf Coast, we take that. That's great. Nice joke. Or you don't know about it, which I think is probably true. No, he gave these speeches where it was rambling absurdity. I read it out loud to one of my classes, and they were kind of thought I was joking. Like, no, this is an actual talk where he's like, you know, don't stand in my way. Some people want to get in my way, but don't stand in my way. And then this diatribe about Texas, saying I've got a redheaded girlfriend in Texas, and she had to explain to me that Texas was as big as Spain, and that's why it's hard to do work there. And I didn't realize Texas was as big as Spain. So you have this guy who's kind of a bonkers character with no emergency management experience, who's just there at FEMA. And I would assume what's happening now is they're putting Kristi Noem, who's DHS, at the head. And just a brief primer for everybody who wasn't around. Before 9/11, right? FEMA was a thing. It had kind of an honorary cabinet position where it could speak directly with the president, right? And this was kind of, I'm very critical of Bill Clinton, but one thing he was very good at was we need to have FEMA here. Again, James Lee Witt was his head of FEMA. We need to do this because the lesson back then was you can't fail at disaster management because it will ruin your political career, So FEMA was that way for a while. 9/11 happens. They put FEMA in this new thing, DHS, where it's in there with ICE. It's in there with, Border Patrol. It's in there with all of the Coast Guard, which is okay. But it's in there with all these things that just don't make any sense for FEMA to be with. And now you have Kristi Noem at DHS, who seems like she's just running FEMA now, who as a governor in South Dakota was not particularly good at emergency management and pretty controversial at it. I think she wasn't even allowed on tribal land for a while, which is a problem if you're working in emergency management. And so now she seems to be the head, but she's just using it to do this, immigration fascism stuff, right?
Well, she's redirecting FEMA funds to things like the Alligator Alcatraz and the detention concentration camps, those facilities in Florida. There's hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts that seem to be getting okayed, including like a grant for the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Dropsite reported this for over $600 million, which isn't just going to be for that one detention facility. It'll be spread more broadly. But contrast that with what the New York Times reported last week, which is that she implemented a policy where contracts of over $100,000 would require her personal sign-off, and she didn't renew contracts that would have helped mitigate some of the worst of the flooding damage until 5 days after they'd already expired, because this policy basically is a catch for any contract, any grant. Because if you could just give people a sense of how infinitesimally small a contract of $100,000 would be within the grand scope of FEMA's responsibilities.
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 things that come up with what you just said. One thing is just a pedantic thing. I don't think it's that big a deal anymore. A lot of people said the money was from FEMA that goes to the concentration camp in the Everglades. It was DHS money that was designated for immigrants that got run through a FEMA grant program. So that one didn't really subtract to FEMA, but it seems like now FEMA money is going to start maybe going there. It's a pedantic point. But yeah, $100,000, right? And so any grant or contract she has to sign off on. But like for the urban search and rescue teams, right? Like USAR teams, we use these emergency management abbreviations to sound cool now. They can't even, they can't even have like lunch for $100,000, right? Once you like crank up one of these teams, I can't remember the exact number now, but you're in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to get them like on the airplane out there, right? So if you're saying we're going to put in this, well, Kristi Noem's got to say okay to it. It's one of those ridiculous things that's across the government now. We're being more efficient, but they're absolutely not. They're not sign off on every $100,000 purchase. It just won't work. Like, because once you get into anything, it's over $100,000. Debris removal, forget about it, right? Search and rescue, no. All of this stuff is over $100,000. Maybe you could do pack lunches for some people for a day. Maybe you could try and open a small rural shelter for $100,000. But I don't know what you can do for $100,000. The other point, yes, I think they're positioning FEMA now to just be part of this whole system. FDM, the Florida Department of Emergency Management, they're very present in the concentration camp in the Everglades, right? You see their symbol, you see their spokespeople, which is tremendous. I'm a Floridian. It's tremendously disappointing for me to see anyone in emergency management say we're going to go along with this, because as I tell our students, our job is to help people. Our job is to help vulnerable people, right? And if you're saying, no, I'm going to participate in fascism, like pick another job. You're not doing our job. I don't know what that is. One note about that quickly, I'm going to do some self-promotion / complaining here. I've been trying to trademark my disaster fascism concept I keep putting out there. I had an op-ed with the New York Times that they kind of shelved after a little bit. It's kind of on the shelf, and I keep kind of checking back in, being like, does that seem to you like disaster fascism, right? Meaning that they're taking, because FEMA got put within DHS, the framework is there to just turn emergency management in general into this structure where you can just keep furthering the goals of oppression and fascism, right?
I want to just ask you, just in terms of like on that cost thing.
Yeah.
The idea that Trump had reiterated early in his administration that I believe is in Project 2025.
Yeah.
Basically, sending all this stuff down to the states.
Yeah.
The Texas has a big
Texas does,
disaster response, but the whole point of having a federal government do it,
Right.
and the whole point of it being not efficient but effective, which are it's not efficient to do a lot of this stuff, frankly, because you're saving lives and
lives aren't efficient,
Right. But the idea that states can take on these type of burdens, they just don't have the resources. And there's, you may get a disaster of this ilk in a state once every 5 years. Maybe it's once every year. Maybe it's once every 10 years. But you can't maintain a vigorous agency if you're only getting these one every 10 years. That's the whole point of the United States having a FEMA.
Yeah, it's crazy. So one of the frustrating things, I think, for everyone about the Trump administration is it seems like it's just detached from history completely, right? So there's a history here. We used to not have FEMA, right? There was a reason that they started FEMA in the late 70s. It was they were trying to work on disasters with like all of these different states, all of these different federal agencies trying to piece this together. And it was horribly inefficient, right? As well as not being effective. And so they thought, well, maybe we can figure out a better way to do this where things are organized at the federal level and coordinated at the federal level. Because, one of the leading definitions of a disaster is that it's something that's not manageable at like whatever level it is that it's happening, right? So if it's bigger than the city can handle, bigger than the state can handle, and disasters happen across state lines constantly, right? So yeah, and you're right pointing out the inequality here. So Texas has essentially unlimited moneymaker. It's got oil, right? And so it can just do, boop, boop, boop. But they fail a lot too. They failed when they had a hard freeze and the power grid went down and people froze in their houses. That's Texas. But yeah, then you get into states that are poor. What are they supposed to do? Even in states, I will say, like I work in Massachusetts now, right? Part of my job is to go around to these local emergency management districts and work on these tabletop exercises with them for these real world scenarios. Our students do that and stuff. And these people, I should say, they're great. I love working with these people. They want to work hard. They want to do all this stuff. There's no emergency management agency in Massachusetts that's funded enough, right? Like one of the places we're doing a hurricane evacuation exercise, and the emergency manager is the fire chief who gets like a $6,000 stipend per year, and then like a volunteer who comes in who retired and kind of thinks the weather's cool comes in, and they have to like run evacuation for like a town of 30,000 or something, right? So there is nowhere in America that has enough money to do emergency management. Texas can kind of make it look like they can sometimes because they have oil money. Florida used to be able to. I used to always say, well, Florida's good at this because they have to be. I don't know if that's true anymore. And one of the tipping points here really was, I think, the Trump response to Maria, where they failed completely. It was horrible. It's still a horrible response. And then no one really talks about it that much outside of Puerto Rico, where people are very aware that it failed. Because it used to be the lesson we were all taught. If you fail at disaster response, your political career is done so. Jeb Bush understood this. Look at what happened to the first George Bush. Look at what happened to the second George Bush. But Trump kind of broke it, right? He fails completely. He's horrible. They're horrible at disaster response. And his fan base just kind of like, well, what are you going to do? And the media, I don't get it, seem to just kind of go along with this. We're like, well, like it seems like we're already past Kerrville now, and they fail completely there.
Yep. Well, Wes Cheek, sociologist, assistant professor at Massachusetts Maritime Academy. Thanks for your time today walking us through this. I suspect we'll be hearing from you more because I don't think there's any sense that the administration is going to get better at this, and climate change is not going to make it any less frequent. That is a recipe for disaster.
Sam, way to bring it back.
Thanks. All right. Appreciate your time, Wes.
Right, good. Thanks for having me on, guys. Great to see you.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.